Hello everyone, good evening. So welcome to week 12 for Photonic Integrated Circuits tutorials. So this is the last tutorial session, and today I'd like to talk which comes under which is one of the applications of Photonic Integrated Circuits. It's photonic computing, or to be more specific, neuromorphic computing using photonic integrated circuits. So this is actually my PhD topic, and I thought it would be a nice application for you guys to also explore. So Sir has also already talked about communication and sensing applications. So computing is one more quite important application of PICs that is emerging at a very rapid pace. There are already startups um, spinning out of research institutions on photonic computing. So yeah, let's see. So I work on artificial neural networks using photonic integrated circuits. So we have ANNs, right? So we have ANN models, deep learning models. You would have heard about all this in the context of machine learning. So deep neural network models, artificial neural network models. So these are models which are used to do certain to perform certain tasks like object detection, image classification, speech recognition, language processing models. All these models come under artificial neural network models. So these models, when we are trying to run them on conventional hardware, um, there are certain challenges that we will see. So when we try to run such models and accelerate the speed of such models and reduce the power requirements using photonic integrated circuits, so that paradigm is called neuromorphic photonics, or photonic accelerators for ANNs. So all these different names, but the concept is the same. So we have an ANN that we want to perform, and we do it on a photonic hardware to get energy efficient operation and also to get faster results, faster learning of the model as well as faster uh, times. Yeah. So my supervisors are Professor Shankar and Professor Chetan from the ESC department in ISC itself. Yeah. So, uh, just a primer on machine learning and what are neural network models. So, machine learning is basically we have a model. It can be a polynomial model or a logistic regression or a neural network model. So, basically, what is a model? A model is nothing but so given a data, you have a model which has certain trainable parameters, and you change these parameters. You will change this A, B, and C so as to fit the data. Okay, so you have an xy data. Okay, so you can put x and y in this model, and then we can change these a's and b's and c's so as to fit the data. So you can see a linear model which is just y equal to b naught plus b1 x does not fit it very well, whereas a polynomial model will fit it well because there are more number of coefficients or more number of parameters, trainable parameters. Yeah. So when we extend this, we come towards neural network models. So neural network models has a lot of parameters, and it's not even just a polynomial. It contains nonlinear terms. So what is a neural network? We'll come to it. So for now, just understand that it is uh, it is a model. Basically, it has trainable parameters and it maps the x-axis, or the it maps the x to the y. So yeah, so we'll have a different features, those correspond to our x, and it maps it to the result, that is the y. So that is the basically an idea of a model. So uh, whenever we have a model and a data set that we want to fit to the model, we call it a machine learning problem. So the data sets can be, so this is an example of a flower classification data set. So this is iris data set. Iris flowers can be classified as setosa, versicolor, Virginica, so different species of the flower, based on the petal and sepal width, length, and other features. So just by looking at the images, the computer can classify these flowers. So this dataset is called iris flower data. Similarly, we also have handwritten digits dataset. So whenever we are trying to fit our model to the dataset, we use something known as optimization algorithms. So these algorithms, like gradient descent, maximum likelihood estimation, they basically tune our model iteratively so as to reach minima for the loss function. So loss function is basically what is the difference between the uh, current um, current estimated value from the model based on the current sets of coefficients or parameters, and the difference of that with the real y value. So the difference between, say, at for this x value, the or you can see it here more clearly. For this particular x value, you can see that the like the experimental y value is this, but the predicted y value is this. So that this difference. So there are different metrics to qualify this distance, but essentially this distance is the loss, and we want to minimize this loss. And these optimization algorithms will basically help us to minimize this loss iteratively or analytically, or yeah. So there are different algorithms for that. So this is the broad picture of machine learning. So now where does photonics come into picture? Before that, uh, let's get a little bit more deeper into neural networks, because photonics has been explored primarily for neural networks, primarily because it has a lot of interconnects. So you see, these are all sets of neurons and they're all connected to each other. And when we have to have such dense computations, such dense interconnected, so the communication has to, from this neuron, has to go to all the different neurons in the next layer. So when the connectivity is so dense, we photonics comes very handy, because there are no RC delays. So when we are making the hardware, imagine putting these many wires across, right? So they will introduce signal distortion, because when wires are close to each other, right, the signals will get distorted, electrical wires, because charge can interact with each other. But a photon, on the other hand, photon in one waveguide won't interact with photon in another waveguide, or even a photon going horizontally won't interact with a photon going vertically, or two photons of different wavelengths in the same waveguide will also not interact. So we can exploit the bandwidth of the waveguides, we can exploit the fact that different modes don't interact with each other. All these things we can exploit to get this high connectivity in the neural networks. So yeah, so let's first go ahead and understand what are neural networks. So neural networks are, again, as I said, machine learning models, but they take their inspiration from a biological root. So in the human biology, we have neurons. So the basic cell, like any system has the basic unit in biology is a cell, right? So for nervous system, the basic unit is a neuron, and a neuron will have dendrites, cell body, axon, and a terminal axon. So so these dendrites will take information from the nearby neurons. This information will come in form of spikes. So when these spikes get added up, so these spikes are basically voltage spikes that change the potential difference between the inside of the neuron and the outside of the neuron. And when this potential difference reaches certain value, above that value, then this neuron will also generate a spike. So it's a electrochemical pathways are there, and it will generate a spike. That spike will travel and amplify over the axon, and then it will be transmitted at the terminal axon to the next neuron. So every neuron will be connected to multiple neurons through something known as synapses. So the signal or the spike from the terminal axon will go to the dendrites of the next neuron through a synapse. And the synapse is what is determining the strength of the signal transfer. So how strongly is neuron 1 connected to neuron 2? How strongly will the firing of neuron 1 affect the firing of neuron 2? That is determined by this synapse. So this is the basic computing mechanism that our human brain or all biological neural networks use, even animal brains use. So this has evolved over course of millions of and billions of years. But then how does this basic functionality translate into complex decisions or thoughts complex problems like how does it do it. So the trick here is that this basic functionality uh, is happening over a lot of neurons. So there is a lot of networks of neurons, and the strengths we can tune, the firing rates we can tune, thresholds can be tuned. So it basically makes a very big model with a lot of parameters. So just we saw in the previous slide, right? So more the number of parameters, better we can fit. So for even more complex tasks, we need even more complex algorithms. So yeah. So the basic function of a neuron, just to see again, if we try to write it in mathematical terms, it's basically that if there is there are certain inputs x1, x2, x3, x4 that the neuron is receiving from the previous layer of neurons, then it gets weighted because of the synapse. Those weights we represent as W1, W2, W3, and so on up to Wn. So these weights are basically telling the strength of the connection. What the neuron does is, in the cell body, it will accumulate this weighted, so the input times the weight product, it will accumulate it. And once this accumulated sum reaches a threshold, then it will start spiking. So that can be modeled basically as a nonlinear function. So the output of this neuron is a nonlinear function of the sum of different inputs, weighted sum of different inputs. So that is the artificial neuron model that we usually use. So we don't restrict ourselves just to spiking neurons. We can use any kind of nonlinear uh, nonlinear function here, and it still helps in a lot of different tasks. So you don't always need spiking to be the nonlinearity. It can be any other nonlinearity. Like the common nonlinearities include ReLU nonlinearity, tanh, sigmoid. All these nonlinearities people have employed and shown reliable classification, reliable results in classification tasks or speech recognition tasks, etc. Yeah. So when we combine this simple neuron model into uh, layers of artificial neural network model, then we have a lot of trainable parameters, and such models can be used to can be trained to perform complex tasks that we have been talking about till now. So just like I said, these are models inspired by the information processing architecture of the brain. They consist of layers of neurons. Every neuron is connected to the previous layer neurons via synapses. A single neuron receives multiple inputs, performs a weighted sum, and then carries out thresholding of the weighted sum. Fully connected neural networks with n nodes require n square multiply accumulate operations per step. Yeah. So yeah. So if I have a network in which there are 3 neurons in this layer and 2 in the next layer, so how many multiply accumulates operations will I require? So multiply accumulation is this operation basically. So I'll have to perform one multiplication between this, one multiplication between this, and so like that there will be, if this is n, this is m, then n into m number of multiplications, and that many times. Also it has to keep accumulating like a counter, keep adding basically, not counter. So if there are n nodes in both the layers, say it was 3 and 3, then we would have required 9. So like that, fully connected neural networks with n nodes require n square MAC operations and n nonlinear operations. So number of nonlinear operations just depends on the number of neurons in that layer. So n. So clearly we can see that the MAC operations is scaling as n square, and nonlinear operations is scaling as n. So if we want to accelerate these new artificial neural networks, we should focus more on the MAC operations, because they are scaling as n square. So that means if we are able to reduce the power requirements or speed up these operations, that will affect the overall speed and power requirements of the neural network more drastically. So yeah, so if we are implementing these algorithms on the present day hardware, what is the challenge? So the challenge comes from the fact that most of the digital architectures that we have and that we use currently are von Neumann based. So there is separate memory, RAM or hard disk, a separate cache memory. Well, cache is still closer, but yeah, separate memory unit and a separate processing unit. And then the processing unit has to continuously keep talking to the memory unit to get all the data, to know what process it is supposed to be doing. So yeah, even though the actual processing can be very fast, but it has to wait for the data to travel via the data bus from the memory unit to the processing unit. This consumes also consumes a lot of energy if we try to do it very fast. And yeah, and there can also be other issues like since it's a digital processor, they will always be limited by their clock rates. So so why not go towards analog is the question. Why not uh, try to mimic the brain, just like our brain is an analog processor, and it is not even having a separate memory unit. It has the memory unit along with the processing unit. So the synapses are basically the weights, right? So those weights are changing dynamically, but they are still stored. So in the form of the chemicals that are already present there, in the form of the chemical gradients that are present uh, in between the axons and the dendrites. So so such kind of analog real-time processing, is it possible to make artificial hardwares that can also do that, and can potentially help us solving this von Neumann bottleneck problem. So yeah, so one step ahead from the von Neumann problem, or the current hardware causing von Neumann problem, was to go for parallelization approaches. So what people did is they went for GPUs. Um, so you can run the model in parallel, or you can run multiple data points in parallel. So GPU is basically it will have multiple cores, right? So you can train different layers in parallel on GPUs, or you can train the entire model is trained on different training samples in different GPUs. But then this parallelization approach is finally limited by the Amdahl's law. There is a limit to how many processes you can do in parallel. Sometimes you need to finish certain tasks before moving ahead to the next set of tasks. So that acts as a limitation. So next is also specialization. So the specialization was what something I was talking about. So if we try to make hardware that is specific for doing this task, so it can take inspiration from the brain, it can take anywhere inspiration from anywhere, but the hardware is such that it is easier to it has the memory co-allocated with the, or rather the weights co-allocated with the processing, and it makes it easier to yeah, easier to do uh, deep learning tests. So such specialized hardware have also started coming up. IBM Truenorth is an example. You can look it up. And there are also NVIDIA chips, specialized chips for ANNs. So all this is electronics, right? Where does photonics come into picture? So if you just look at this graph here, so digital electronics has an efficiency wall. So digital CPU efficiency cannot go beyond a point. How much ever you try to parallelize or do this and that, there is a limitation. So then people go with specialized chips, just like I showed in IBM Truenorth and all. They have shown considerable efficiency improvements, but the speed improvement is still low. You see, the speed is still limited to 10 power 4 megamach per second per square centimeter. So how can we improve the computational speed in a given area, in a given set of speed means obviously means in a given time. How can we increase the computational speed and at the same time do not compromise on the efficiency? So to do that, the proposed approaches are uh, going towards neuromorphic photonics. So what photonics offers is, photonics offers a very high bandwidth, so that offers a lot of parallelization opportunities. So we can do wavelength division multiplexing, and so just like we said, right? So here in the GPU we were doing data parallelism. So different data sets were running through the same ANN artificial neural network at the same time. So that same thing we can do using a wavelength division multiplexing, but even more efficiently, because we can use the same hardware. So you know, right, a waveguide can carry multiple wavelengths at the same time, and they won't interact with each other. So if you encode different data on different wavelengths and send it through the same computing circuit, it will do the computation at the same time for all those wavelengths. So you don't have to spend any extra power on it, and you are also improving on the speed because it's all happening at the same time. So yeah, so wavelength division multiplexing is a very strong selling point for neuromorphic photonics. Also, linear operations can be performed in principle with very high energy efficiency, because linear operations can be performed just as light propagates. So as light propagates through my circuit, all the operations can be performed passively, provided that the circuit is in the tuned to in the correct state, or how to say. So there are non-volatile memory options that are available for photonics, which make it possible to train the circuit once, and once it is trained, we don't have to input any further energy. So yeah, so yeah, that saves a lot of energy. Another thing is, why we can't do all this, like in principle we can also do this in analog electronics, right? If you make an analog electronic, say crossbar array, um, why can't we use non-volatile memory there? Why can't that help us in getting energy efficiency similar to photonics? So there the major challenge comes in is the maintaining the signal integrity. So as we keep on increasing the number of channels, number of data points, we cannot, first of all, we don't have something like wavelength division multiplexing. We have it, but it's not as efficient as photonics. And then there will also be joule heating because of the resistors and the wires coming close to each other. So that is a limitation. So that will basically limit the speed. So if we try to go to higher speeds, then the signal integrity will be compromised. And at lower speeds, yeah, so we're limited to the speed bottleneck, just as I said, 10 power 4 in electronics. Yeah. So yes, so yes, let's look at one of the photonic approaches that have been proposed. There are multiple, but I like just for the simplicity of the talk, I will stick to one for now. So one, and the approach is coherent photonic neural networks. So by coherent, I mean that um, of course you can do WDM, you can send multiple frequencies, but um, at the same time, if you just send single frequency, all the computation is happening because of interference. So the same frequency light will get split into two and then combine, and then because of the interference, it will either be constructive or destructive interference. So let's break everything down. So yeah, so first of all, the input. So input is basically our x, right? The x will be encoded in terms of optical power or intensity of light. Okay, so the inputs will be encoded as intensities of light, and then there will be a circuit of interferometers. So they are called multi-port interferometers. So we have seen one input one output interferometer, Mach-Zehnder interferometer. Similarly, these are also similar only, but they have multiple input ports and multiple output ports. So the number of input ports and output ports depends on the size of the matrix multiplication that we want to do. So this section, optical interference unit, will basically do a matrix multiplication. So yeah, so imagine that I want to go from this hidden layer to the next hidden layer. So what are we doing? We are doing multiply accumulate operations. So these multiply accumulate operations can also be written as a W matrix, that is the weight matrix, times the output of the uh, hidden layer, first hidden layer. So that is basically a W matrix times a vector multiplication. So for depending on the size of the W matrix, we will have the number of input. So like here there were 4 inputs, 4 outputs. So we'll have here in the Mach Zehnder multipart interferometer of 4 inputs and 4 outputs. Okay, and based on the matrix that we want to implement, we will change the phase shifters. So this is a Mach Zehnder, 2 input, 2 output Mach Zehnder with 2 phase shifters, and then they are cascaded like that. So by tuning the phase of each of these phase shifters, I can change the output. So whatever input I'm giving will get multiplied to the matrix that is set by these phase shifters. Okay, so that will do the multiply accumulate part. So next is the non-linear part. So for that we'll need an optical non-linear unit. So this can be done by properties like saturable absorption, bistability, etc., or even photo detection. Photo detection is the one that is currently the most used. So we just detect it in a photo detector, and since a photo detector will have its own inherent non-linearity, that we can use as a non-linear. So we don't have to do anything additional to that. Right. So how do we model the matrix that is performed by this optical interference unit? So for understanding the four, like instead of going directly to the 4x4 unit, let's look at a 2x2 unit. So a 2x2 basic unit, this is called a tunable basic unit. This can do a unitary matrix, unitary 2x2 matrix, and the is the relation between the inputs and the outputs. So input and output electric fields. So if you write the input electric field as E1, let me take a pen. Right. So the input I can write it as electric field E1 e power I phi 1. Here electric field E2, amplitude E2 e power I phi 2. So these are my inputs. So the input information is encoded in the amplitude of this, or rather the intensity, or the intensity is directly related to the amplitude. So I can see the input information is in the amplitude, and initially let's say phi 1 and phi 2 are same, because the information we have encoded only in the amplitudes, the phases remain the same, or we make sure that the phases remain the same. Then once it goes through the coupling region, now we will have here, say this is a 50-50 splitter. Then based on the splitter's properties, we will have some other amplitude of electric field here and phase here, and electric field here, phase here. Based on this thermoptic phase shift, that will change the interference at this coupling region, and in the output we will see. So for the simplicity, let's imagine there is no light going through the second waveguide, only the light is going through the first waveguide. So since this is a 50-50 splitter, E1 will become E1 by 2, even by root 2, because it is a 50-50 splitter in power. So intensity will be half, but electric field amplitude will be even by root 2. E power I phi and E2 by, sorry, E1 by root 2 again, because same E1 is getting split here. E power I phi prime. Why the phases will be different? Because of the coupler, right? So coupler will also introduce a phase in different arms, so the phase will be different. So in case of 50-50 splitter, if this is plus pi by 4, this will be minus pi by 4. So there will always be a pi by 2 phase shift between the two, if you're only sending light in one arm. If you're sending in both arms, then Of course, there will be more to it. Yeah. Then there will be a phase shifter that will introduce an additional delta phi, and then it will combine here. Then based on the difference in phase phi plus delta phi minus phi 1, based on the difference in phase, either there will be a constructive phase in one arm, like either there will be a constructive interference or a destructive interference. So that will determine my outputs. So basically, calculating the matrix for the directional coupler, the matrix for the phase shifter, doing all that, we see that the net input and output matrix of this device, the tunable basic unit, is this. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, so we know that now that this TBU, tunable basic unit, has a matrix form like this, where phi is my this phase shift and theta is this phase shift. Okay. Yeah. So I said that the amplitude of the electric field will decide the input, right? So how do we change the electric field amplitude? So say usually I will have single laser source, right? We cannot have as many laser sources as the number of inputs. So these models can have a lot of different features and inputs. We cannot always have that many number of lasers. It's not practical. So say I have a single laser source. To to encode the inputs in the power, optical power of spatially different waveguide light, we first say I need 4 inputs. Then I split it into 4 arms, and then on each arm we can keep a Mach Zehnder interferometer. So this circle part is basically this. So what the Mach Zehnder does is, it will have on one arm a phase shifter. So we will give a voltage to the phase shifter. Based on this voltage will be based on the input. So we know, right? So we have a model. Say the model is m of x is equal to y. That is what we were trying to fit. So to encode this x, corresponding to this x, we will decide a voltage. We will decide some relation between this x and voltage and give that voltage to one of the arms. So so first say I have a into e power I phi is my electric field. This y split will split it into half, a by root 2, a by root 2. This voltage will introduce a phase shift, so that this will become e power I phi prime. And then when it comes back here, the net electric field will be the sum of both, right? So a by root 2, e power I phi plus e power I phi prime. So e power I phi plus e power I phi prime is basically like a sine wave. So what will that mean is, when we take the intensity will change based on the phase difference. So the intensity formula will be E square. That will come out as a sinusoidal or cosine dependence on phi prime minus phi. And this is how you see it in a simulation. So based on the input voltage, we see a change in the output optical power. So that's how we can encode. So say I want to encode as 0, I'll set my 0 here. I want to encode as 1, I'll set it at this power. Say minus 5 power is my 1 and minus 30 is 0. Then for giving 0 value, I'll give 1.5 as my voltage. For giving 0.5 value, I'll give say something like 2 as my voltage. And for giving 1 value, I'll give 2.5 as my voltage. Like that. So by changing the voltage, I'm changing the input encoding. Then for the matrix, I said that this tunable basic unit block can do a unitary matrix. But in general, we might want to do any real matrix, right? So why like the neural network might not be just limited to unitary matrices. So for doing a general matrix, we just use the singular value decomposition theorem. So that will be unitary times diagonal times conjugate unitary. So That is what is done here. So for doing a diagonal matrix, it basically means that tuning the power, right? So if we just disregard the extra power, that is like doing a diagonal matrix. That is shown by these regions. We are disregarding the power in one of the arms and just making sure the power in one arm is the one that is what we require for the diagonal power. So this is how the diagonal matrix looks, and it can be tuned by these thetas, theta 1 and theta 2. Yeah. So in a neural network, we need to perform the following vector matrix multiplication. So this is matrix, this is vector. Where x is the output vector of the previous layer. W is the weight matrix, and f of y is the output of the current layer. Yeah. So y is just the multiply accumulate thing, and then we need to do an f of y onto it to get the neuron outputs for the current layer. F is a nonlinear activation. The photonic neural network, uh, if we just detect the outputs, then y becomes absolute value of m times e. M is this matrix here, the singular value decomposition matrix. Right. So whatever is the photonic Mach-Zehnder matrix, that times the electric field is the product that we are getting, and when we detect it, we automatically do a absolute value, or we are detecting the intensity, where E is the input vector of the optical field amplitudes, M is the matrix corresponding to multiple absolute value is calculated element wise. To implement a given neural network on a photonic chip, we need to find the necessary phase shifts to determine the M corresponding to the given weights. This can be achieved by equating the above equations and then solving for required phase shifts. And the photonic multiplication cannot yield outputs with total amplitude higher than total input amplitude. Yeah, so that's one limitation. So even though I said that we can get any matrix that we want, but we cannot get a matrix in which the output sum is more than the input. So we cannot have a network in which the optical power in the output is higher than the total power that we are giving through all the inputs. So that is not possible. So total output power can never exceed total input power. So only we are restricted to a class of weight matrices that in which there is total output power, which maintain that the total output of the matrix vector product will be smaller than the initial input vector. Yeah. Yes. So in our lab, how we go about doing all this is we use thermo-optic phase tuning as of now. We have also explored non-volatile memory based SB2C3 based phase tuning. But there are certain challenges we are facing for it right now. Like we are able to non-volatilely tune it in one direction, but then bringing it back to the other direction is uh, not possible on chip. So that we are working on. So basic thermo-optic tuning I can explain here. Thermo-optic tuning is just that. So this is a grating coupler. Okay, these four are grating couplers. So we can couple light through them and take out light through them using a fiber. So we'll place a fiber here, and light will come from the fiber. 1550 nanometers wavelength light will come from the fiber. It will get coupled to the waveguide, split into 50-50, or yeah. So yeah, they were designed for 50-50, but turns out it is not. Like after the fabrication, it was not exactly 50-50. And then the light will. So this is like a Mach-Zehnder interferometer, and on one arm I have a phase shifter. So what is this phase shifter? This phase shifter is basically just a very long thin wire. Okay, just an electrical resistor. Why we need it? So the idea here is when we pass a voltage to the resistor, or when we pass a current through the resistor, there will be power dissipated, that is V times I, voltage times current. So this power, so this much power the resistor will consume, right? So some of it will get converted to heat, and that heat will reach the underlying waveguide. So there is a waveguide. So this is a silicon waveguide. On top there is oxide, just to insulate it from the metal heater, and on top of the oxide there is a metal heater. If we don't put this oxide, then all the light will be absorbed by the metal itself. So this is gold. the gold heater is placed like 800 900 nanometers above the silicon wavelet, and then due to the heating there will be a phase shift, and based on the phase shift we'll see different output in the output port. So you can see here, as a function of voltage, my uh, my output is changing, or the loss in both the arms. This is output 1, output 2. So one is the red and 2 is blue. So loss in both the arms is changing based on my power. So I'm giving input only in one of the gratings, not in the other, to check. It's a device. Similarly, we had also characterized multi-port ones. We had got some results. Yeah. Yes. So it's an ongoing project. We are like we are doing multiple things right now. We are trying to integrate multiple inputs. So currently we are able to give only single input in the characterization setup that we have. We're trying to integrate like have packaging solutions so that we can have multiple inputs, multiple outputs. Yeah, it's an ongoing project. These are all the output responses that we see by giving like I'm giving input in one arm and checking output in all four arms by tuning one of the heaters. So say heater 1. This we can. So this is a frequency response, this wavelength. Usually we'll just park at one wavelength and then see the difference for different voltages. So that is what is shown here in this diagram. Yes. And then this is how you can do an XOR problem by using a simple splitter network. So just by changing the, so in this case, so XOR is basically like on software. So XOR network requires a non-linearity to classify. You cannot just draw a line on the plane and classify these zeros and ones. You will always have to draw a sphere or a round outlet. So it's not linearly classifiable data points. So yeah, so you need some kind of a nonlinearity. So but this can be easily done in photonics by just seeing that. So any two, so these are different splitters, and these splitters are controlled by these again heaters. So by giving different voltages in different heaters, so any two heaters I can choose. In this case I think I've chosen this one and this one, I think. Yeah. So by choosing different heaters and giving, so say if my input x1 is 0, I'll give 0 volts here, and x2 is also 0, I'll again give 0 here. If it was a 0 and 1, this would be 0 and this will be 1 volt, like that. And I'm giving input, optical input here. These are electrical inputs, and if I'm seeing outputs at all these four ports. Sorry, 8 ports, not 4 ports. So this is like expanding our, so whenever we don't have a non-linearity, right? So one way of classifying this is by drawing a non-linear boundary. Another way is expanding our number of dimensions. So if I just make a third dimension here, that is the z axis. So say this is x and y. If I make a z axis and pull my ones in the negative z axis and push my zeros in the positive z axis, then we can separate it linearly, right? So by expanding the number of dimensions, we are able to classify this. Similarly, similar thing is happening here. So first we had 2 dimensions, now we will have 8 dimensions, and because we have 8 dimensions, this problem becomes linearly classifiable. And yeah, so then we are able to make a linear classification boundary. Yes. So the net, so yeah, so this was a slight detour. So these kinds of networks, right? These we have simulated it in numerical interconnect, and we were able to train iris datasets. So on these kinds of networks, and since it's interconnect, and did not do much error analysis here. We were getting 100% accuracy, which is not weird also because it's an iris data set is pretty simple to classify, so it only has 4 features. So based on those 4 features, it's pretty basic to classify. um, yeah, so we are looking at different training algorithms also to train our devices. Yeah, and then we did a small simulation of fabrication variations, and we saw that as we go on increasing the matrix dimensions, then so okay, so let me try to explain this. So say I have a 2 cross 2 matrix, so that will look like this. So basically a single Mach Zehnder with input 1 and input 2. Now I have tuned this Mach Zehnder, the phase shifts on this Mach Zehnder, such that if I send input in from here, I am expecting all the input, all the light to go to here. But there'll still be some light here because of certain slight variations will be there, right? So even if we tune it to exactly, like even if we simulate it to get exactly this, we might see some variations. So yeah, so those variations can come from different places. So those places are basically an effective width sensitivity. So when we are calculating the n effective for the waveguide, like we did in the ring case in the last class, the we also need to calculate the sensitivity to width variations. So because whenever we are fabricating, we will have certain width variations. So based on that, that sensitivity we calculated from simulations. Height sensitivity we calculated. Coupling ratio sensitivity to width and height we calculated. And then we gave a Gaussian noise in all these parameters: the width of the waveguide, the height of the waveguide, the gap between the two waveguides. And then based on that Gaussian noise, um, we found the expected response with the Gaussian noise. And we saw that for 2 cross 2 case, we find a good good power difference between this arm and this arm. But for the 4 cross 4 case, it reduced slightly. You see, very slight difference, but it has still reduced. This has come down a bit, this has gone up a bit. So all these three should be as low as possible. For 6 cross 6, it has increased even further. I mean, the difference has decreased. For 10 cross 10, the difference is even further decreased. So as we go on scaling the number of inputs and outputs in the matrix, it's causing a problem for us. The yeah, so the desired output is all the power is in one arm, but now we are seeing that some power has gone to the other arm, and the difference between the power in this arm and this arm is reducing. So when we are going to use this for real world machine learning applications, we'll require thousands of inputs and thousands of outputs, so 1000 cross 1000 matrices. So imagine what will happen to these things. So we need to work on that also. We need to see how we can reduce the sensitivity to, or rather there is a limit to which we can reduce the sensitivity to width and height variations and stuff like that. But we can train our network in such a way that it learns to the hardware learns the problem regardless of all these variations. So those things are possible. Those things are basically this teacher student learning. So there is a teacher network that we are training on a conventional computer, and a student network that is our hardware. And yeah, we are working on ways to do this by and to be able to train our networks, hardware networks, regardless of all the variations that are there. Yes, so this PPT I had prepared actually for a review. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this extra like class. So yeah, this is the last class in the series. Please let me know your feedbacks. Yes, thank you all for watching the videos. And I actually could not upload the videos at the correct time after 6th week because I could not keep up with the classes. I'm really sorry for that. Yeah, I hope to not do it again.